This week on To the Contrary.
First, mothers arrested for child endangerment. Then, promoting diversity can hurt female executives and executives of color. Behind the headlines, does the women's movement need a jump start?
Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, arresting poor moms.
An Arizona woman who left her young children in a car while she went on a job interview says it was a moment of desperation. Her lawyer struck a deal this week to drop child abuse charges against Shanisha Taylor. The judge ordered her instead to take parenting and substance abuse classes. She will regain custody of her children. But another woman in South Carolina still faces charges of unlawful conduct towards a child for allowing her 9-year-old daughter to play in the park across from the McDonald's where she was working. Even these women's supporters don't applaud their actions. They do say high-profile cases highlight public policy issues which should not be relegated to the criminal justice system.
Now we're starting to criminalize parents for it. I think that's where it becomes really dangerous. Particularly women of color, low-income women. Punishing these mothers were not really helping anyone. You know, the kids were taken away and put in protective services, even though none of them were actually harmed by the choices that their moms made. And so they're spending time away from their mothers, which is not good for them. And now these mothers have been arrested, and now they have records. And that is such a huge impediment in our economy to getting a job.
Covert says welfare reform is putting poor mothers in difficult situations.
When we passed welfare reform, for example, in the 1990s, the promise we made was we're going to require that you go to work in order to get these benefits. But in return, we'll help you do that. And we'll do that with childcare and some other safety net supports. And so, you know, the work participation rate for these mothers went up. They fulfilled their end of the bargain. They're out there. They're trying to get jobs. They're trying to hold down jobs. And we are not living up to our end of giving them adequate support.
So, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeever, should these women have been arrested?
Well, the reality is that what happened to them is an indictment on our society, that they were even put in a position where this would occur. Women like this need affordable child care, quality child care. They don't need a rap sheet.
The decision about whether something constitutes child abuse that should be punished or whether it's a negligence and oversight that just can be remedied in another way has to be made at the level of someone who knows that situation. That's the kind of care and concern and support we need to be giving in our society.
Throwing women in jail is not an appropriate response to a failed social safety net, and what we need to do is take a look at the welfare to work requirements and throw them out.
I couldn't agree more. This is not the way to go about things. Arresting poor mothers doesn't help them at all. I think there are other interventions, such as getting Child Protective Services involved right away. Showing a poor mother that they're taking the children out of the home is going to have a greater effect.
Is this part of a national trend? Are we going to see more and more of this, or is it just 2 odd cases?
Well, let's be clear about what's at issue here. Welfare to work has actually helped single mothers escape poverty, find work. Child poverty plummeted after the welfare reform of 1996. This has been a dramatically successful reform. Bill Clinton signed it. President Obama on the campaign trail acknowledged that he had been wrong to oppose welfare reform. It was the right thing to do to lift people out of poverty. We should keep doing that. It provides child care support.
I was going to say, didn't it originally
It does still.
Daycare?
It does still. I don't think any evidence has been presented that we've reduced funding.
I thought the Congress had cut funding.
No,
they have.
Yes.
We have 45 federal programs providing early childhood education and care. 45 programs at the federal level, $25 billion. Child care is out there. If we have breakthroughs in the systems, something fell through, we need to address that. But the welfare reform is not the culprit here.
A couple of problems. Welfare reform was not a success. In fact, we have record level poverty today. If welfare reform was a success, we would have actually seen welfare rolls increase during our recession when it was logical because you had people actually losing jobs at record levels, and said we saw people still hemorrhaging off the rolls. So clearly people are falling through the cracks. It only reaches about 25% of the people who qualify for it today. So there is a problem. Secondly, this issue of the funding for child care services is plummeted. We were at about $4 billion in funding for child care back in 2000. As of 2013, it's down to less than $3 billion, 2.6 actually. So we're losing money.
Okay, I don't get it. What are you counting that she's not counting? She's saying $2 billion, you're saying $25 billion.
Yeah, there are 45 different programs
that can't possibly be right.
Here's one thing. When we talk about welfare, we often get confused. There are 80 federal means-tested programs that are providing cash, food, housing, medical assistance, social services to poor and low-income Americans. It's a big
So you're saying these
net.
women had somewhere they could go where they could immediately drop off their kids
Presumably
for a job
they did.
interview.
They may not have known about it if something fell through. But there are services.
Are you talking about there's a difference between Head Start and child care? There's a difference. What you're talking about is the universe of services that are available. That would include things like Head Start. Exactly. But if you are working McDonald's at 10 o'clock at night, for example, is Head Start available for you? No. What I'm saying is that there needs to be child care services that are available to people, that are widely available, that have flexible hours, that are affordable. And instead of making that more available for people who are in crisis, we are continuing to cut the funding for those services.
But, you know, I want to ask, I heard the woman interviewed on the Today Show, the Arizona woman. She was incredibly articulate. This clearly is an educated woman.
Yes.
How did she? I don't know what she does, and I don't know what her education level is, but it was clearly college or more. How could she let herself fall into this situation?
She was actually someone who was in middle class. She was not a welfare recipient, first of all, so these are really two different issues. She was a middle class woman who got caught up in the decline that we had with our economy. And she had worked in the housing industry. And when that tanked, her job tanked. And she was never able to get another job that provided that level of income.
So that has nothing to do then with, so you're talking more about federally subsidized daycare for middle class
low-income women. Actually, for low income, but she was no longer in the middle class. She had dropped down to very low-income jobs, and what made this situation so unfortunate is she was desperate because this was a job interview that would have gotten her back into the middle class, and her prearranged child care fell through at the last minute, and this was the emergency situation that she was faced with.
Two things here. One, the cost of childcare often exceeds the cost of going to a public university in the course of a year, and so we need to talk about the actual cost of childcare. But Bonnie, I want to go back to your original question of will we see more of this? And unfortunately, I think the answer might be yes. And the reason why I say that is because Representative Paul Ryan just came out with a new budget proposal that would actually create work requirements for virtually all aspects of the social safety net. So we wouldn't just have the welfare to work requirement. You would have to have the work requirement for food stamps even. And so when we're talking about streamlining these programs into one giant program and making it so that people need to work, in order to, just put food on the table. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see more women driven into desperate measures.
One good thing about Paul Ryan's plan is that these opportunity grants exist for states, and I think all government should be local because it's really helpful to see what each state is going through. West Virginia, where I'm from, incredibly poor. There are a lot of anti-poverty measures that could work there that are not going to work for New Jersey, for example, and I think this is sort of the good part of the program.
But is there enough in that? I don't know if you've have reviewed Paul Ryan's
budget. There will never be enough, Bonnie. There will never be enough.
The problem with it is, frankly, that if you're an American, you should be able to get services if you need it. We've already seen the debacle that happened with Medicaid expansion. We've already seen that debacle where those states where you have large concentrations of poor people are not able to get Medicare, are not able to get health care services because their governors have chosen not to accept the money that's available. The same thing would happen in a broader way with other poverty services if Paul Ryan's plan were put into place.
What's at the crux of the matter here, though, is that basically we're looking for ways to take care of others, and we keep doing it, but the only thing that can help is more private and public partnerships. I think truly that's what's going to help in certain states, and this will promote that. Paul Ryan's plan will promote that. When you can't keep getting enough of the federal government's kitty, you're going to find creative ways at the state level, and I think that's what's promoted by Paul Ryan.
When our neighbors are in need and have nowhere else to turn, we should help them out, and Americans believe in that strongly. But 8 out of 10 Americans also say that those who can should seek work or find work or get work as a condition of receiving aid. That's supported by 8 out of 10 Americans.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Bay. From finding daycare to promoting diversity.
women who promote other women and employees of color could be sabotaging their own careers. That's the conclusion of a new study where female executives who hired and promoted a diversity of workers were penalized in performance reviews. Minority executives who valued diversity risked being seen as incompetent, but white men received high ratings for promoting women and minorities. The University of Colorado study asked bosses and peers to rate 362 executives on performance, warmth, competence, and commitment to racial and gender diversity. Researchers believe women and minorities suffered because their behavior was perceived as, quote, selfishly advancing the social standing of their own low-status demographic groups, end quote. So reinforcing the status quo may be the key to cracking the glass ceiling.
So does this study say, reinforce the notion that we need more women in the C-suites, the upper level corporate suites?
Of course it reinforces the notion, yes, but I think really casting aside credible, knowledgeable, the best candidates in search of the female and the minority is wrong. I really want the best qualified candidates to be there, and I think that the study sort of undermines that.
But if you find them and they happen to be women and they happen to be of color, and you hire and promote them, you're still going to be perceived as incompetent or selfishly promoting your own personal agenda.
That's the popular myth out there, and yes, this study is showing that it's happening, but in my experience as a female and a minority, I'm just saying that we need more doors held open for us, not sort of come through and take the seat, but more open doors. You know, that's really all that matters here, to get more people of color and women ahead.
Well, I think the main takeaway from this report is that we need to have white men step up in bringing women and people of color into leadership. And one of the ways that we need white men to step up is in a robust defense of affirmative action, which is precisely what we need to tackle this problem. And I just want to directly address this idea that somehow affirmative action is demeaning or devalues people. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Let's look at the statistics here. There's an old white boys network that's letting people in the door, and until we find aggressive ways to combat that, we're not going to see any change.
So is this, do you think, Avis, what's holding women back as opposed to having children? I mean, most of the blame on women's lack of advancement in the workforce is on the fact that they're the ones who have the kids. They're the ones who, at least the older generations, take more maternity leave than their husbands or partners take paternity leave. Is this the problem?
I think this is a part of the problem, definitely. And I'm so glad that this study was done because, I'm writing a book actually on black women in leadership, and I can tell you that what we see in corporate America is not a reflection of who's the most qualified. It is a reflection of who has doors open for them and who do not have doors open for them. And what we are seeing with this particular study is that stereotypes that people garner that automatically assume that if you see a white male, he looks like a leader, and therefore he is qualified.
But are women buying into this stereotype? Well, because it's not just white men who were polled.
That's true. But what was really interesting about this study is it found that those people who were able to advance, who were able to pierce that glass ceiling, both women and people of color, were people who sort of parroted that same ideology and were used sort of as tokens, because if they acted differently and tried to expand opportunities for other women and for other people of color, then oftentimes they were penalized for it and were graded lowly in performance reviews. So it's perpetuating that same mythology, unfortunately.
Go ahead.
No, I just don't fit into this. I mean, I'm a female and a woman of color, and I've been places where doors have been open for me, and literally I've been told that, listen, you're not the best for this, and I take that and I walk away. Now, if I'm there simply and given the job...
You're not the best for this, meaning
I'm not best qualified for the job, so...
your credentials aren't good enough.
Well, yeah, or I might not have taken the test, best, that kind of thing. And there have been those instances, and I don't want to end up somewhere because somebody says, you're a female and you're a woman of color. Asian American women were commonly thought of way too smart. Somebody actually just said to me last week, they said, why aren't you a lawyer or a doctor? I walked away. I took great offense to that. Asian American women were thought to all be really smart and into these great science fields. Well, it's not true. Some of us pursue other careers. And so these stereotypes I do think are prevalent. I don't think, agreed, that the best qualified candidates are in the C-suites right now, but I do think we can open doors to get them there along with these women and minorities.
You know what I would say to a female manager is do the right thing, have a reputation for consistently doing the right thing, rewarding merit, being fair and equitable, and then you don't have to worry about every new poll or survey or report that comes down on how you might be perceived. I think that makes women too self-conscious about their every motion rather than concentrating on doing the right thing.
Your thoughts?
I think that people do the right thing. I think that most people want to be good at their professions. You put a lot of time in it and energy in it. But the reality is that institutionally, some people are advantaged and others aren't, and we need to be brave enough to face that as a society and then be very proactive in addressing those issues.
But what I don't get here is why is it that women, and I guess women and minorities buy into this, right? Or am I wrong on that point? That, when white males take a leadership position and diversify, they're heroes, and when anyone else does it, they're incompetent?
Well, it's a survival mechanism. That's what it is. And so it's something that's both, I think, sometimes conscious and sometimes unconscious, really. It's about who gets pulled into, who gets to be the token person in the first place, someone who's non-threatening, someone who's not perceived to try to change the order of how things are run. But I think it's also a survival thing. I mean, let's reflect back to Jill Abramson. This is an amazing thing to reflect on, this study, in light of her being called pushy. In fact, she was often regarded in the newsroom as someone who was a real leader trying to bring women up into leadership through the ranks, and she was shoved out. And so I think that's a perfect example of what happens when women try to assert themselves and bring more women into power.
All right, behind the headlines. Is the women's movement stalled? The question has been posited many times, but one legal scholar has theories she says explain what's keeping women back from full equality.
There's not widely perceived to be a problem, and it's this no problem that I think is really at the root of our current dilemma. The sense that barriers have come down, women are moving up, and full equality is upon us or right around the corner. And the statistics just paint a more dispiriting picture. We're a very long way from the gender equal society that most Americans say they want and believe in.
Deborah Rhode, a law professor at Stanford University, blames in part what she calls DIY or do-it-yourself feminism.
Too many women individualize the problem. They look for individual solutions to broader collective and structural dilemmas. And it isn't until women begin to see their collective stake in furthering the women's agenda that we're likely to make major progress in furthering it. Having an organized women's movement is one of the best predictors of women's social and economic progress. We can't do it by ourselves.
In a new book, What Women Want, Rhode says she wants to jumpstart the women's movement.
In some ways, writing a book that's titled What Women Want runs the risk of appearing to obscure the enormous divisions across class, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Women don't speak with one voice on these issues.
Other communities, such as LGBTQ, continue to move forward, gaining ground in their fight for equal rights as a unified, cohesive group. But Rhode says the women's movement got stuck on the notion that women don't speak with a single voice.
There are profound divisions that get in the way of building coalitions. But it's our failure to understand those differences and work to bridge them, and we need to do a better job in trying to build a united political front on the issues on which the vast majority of women do care. Paid parental leave, better child care, equal pay in the workplace, society less riven with domestic violence and rape.
Rhode would like to see more young women calling themselves feminists, but she says it's not mandatory for a restart of the movement.
What is critical is use of the term the women's agenda, the women's movement. And there, I think, we're on much firmer ground. A majority of American women think that a strong women's movement is a good thing and necessary for social progress.
While social media play a leading role in organizing around issues, point-and-click advocacy may not be enough.
Often, I think women are satisfied with just venting about the issue and not doing the hard work of organizing to change it and supporting candidates who will and donating money to political causes.
So you, of course, working at Now, your prior job, were right in the midst of the women's movement. Has it stalled, do you think?
Well, let's ask this question. Does the women's movement need a kick in the pants? My answer is an enthusiastic yes.
And so why does it need that kick?
Yeah. So I'd like to go into that a little further. So first, unfortunately right now, one of the dominant paradigms that we use to talk about women's issues and women's equality is sort of a self-help, let's self-help our way out of problems, sort of a lean-in model, right? And there's nothing wrong with it's a real problem that's being discussed there, but that is not where we can stop. We need to also have an aggressive policy agenda that's working to secure full equality for women, and I mean without religious exemptions, too, as well. So let's talk about how we do that. Well, one thing that really needs to happen is the establishment women's movement is very much, it's too white, it's too close to the Democratic Party, and frankly, it's too tied into the electoral cycle. And so a lot of good people are doing critical work trying to defeat guys who are saying, hey, it's a good thing if you got raped because we got a baby out of it. Okay, that's a laudable goal, but we have too many resources focused there right now. And so what I really think is needed, and where we have this vacuum and void right now, is sort of a radical direct action component, more along the lines of Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. We need to change the paradigm by bringing women's stories to the forefront and also by chaining ourselves to the White House fence.
I think there are two paradigms here. I would agree with that. And the one paradigm is a liberal feminist idea that you're going to pursue a set of policy proposals that doesn't represent the vast dimensions and diversity of what women want. And the other is one that would allow more individual freedom. I'm all for the do-it-yourself idea. We want to make policy a place where different values can be expressed. We portray, too often the mainstream media, I would say even some things you just said there, portray this as a zero-sum game, that we can't live and let live and have religious freedom alongside other freedoms. And that's got to stop. That's not consistent with our Constitution.
I think that there definitely is more work that needs to be done, and I'm very optimistic
from where I sit in the 60s and 70s, until 1972, the New York Times ran help wanted female, help wanted male classified ads. Okay, that there was blatant and legal discrimination, and once we got past that, everybody kind of sat back and said, okay, well, we've got laws on the books. You can't discriminate on the basis of pregnancy, and took a break. But you're saying there needs to be a jump start now, and I don't think there's any women's organization out there saying that and trying to do something about it.
And you know what, Bonnie? I agree with you, actually. There are a number of great grassroots activists, both online and organizing at the community level. But if you're talking about the mainstream establishment feminist organizations, like I said, they're doing good policy work, but it's not what's going to move the needle and truly change the paradigm. And so it's clear that we do need a more aggressive push.
I think it's interesting, though, that what the women's movement is facing now is very similar, I would think, that what we've seen in terms of the black community with the civil rights movements. I mean, once you got rid of the very in-your-face Jim Crow system, and now we've moved to a situation where we have a black president, all of a sudden we're quote-unquote post-racial. So we act as if racism.
However, that gain right there, having a black president, is a pretty major push toward. I mean, I think people would be saying women are now equal if Hillary Clinton had been elected president, and I do think there's a the same thing with Obama. In other words, there's no mountain we can't climb. There's no place in the society we can't get to.
But then, other people would say that even though we do have a black president, obviously there are still sort of entrenched issues that we face that we still haven't gotten over yet. And so there still are issues that need to be addressed across race. And even if we had Hillary Clinton as president, I would argue that that would create another layer of problems for women, because once again you would say they've made it, when in actuality there are still challenges that would exist.
I think we're light years away from Alice Paul's days, and I think we've come a long way, enough to earn our place in these boardrooms and jobs and of any sort. And I really disagree with this notion that individual voices don't matter. I'm out there kind of advocating individually, becoming economically successful, touch wood, and hoping that that demonstrates to other women. So I think, yes, we need one voice, but it still needs to be many. And that turns into one.
And we have many thoughts about that. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt it's stalled. I mean, the first part of Lean In is all about